Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session. We are talking through policies for public sector work today. We've got quite a few people signed up for the session, so I will just give it a couple of seconds whilst people join. So welcome, everybody. It's lovely to have you here. I will, just as people are joining us, I'll whip through some housekeeping very quickly. So if you haven't joined a Go for Growth webinar before, you might not know who I am. So my name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders of an organisation called Go for Growth. If you've been before, you will have seen me many times. As always, this session is being recorded today. So a copy of the recording and the slide deck that we're using today will be sent out to you, usually within 48 hours of the webinar today. So any links that are in the slide deck that we go through today, you will also be able to have those live links when they come out as well. So any links that we reference in the slide deck will also be included in the pack that we send out. As we are on Zoom, there is a chat and a Q&A function. Please do feel free to use both. I have put some time for Q&A aside at the end, but feel free to ask questions as we go. If you can pop any questions into the Q&A, that would be great. Any comments, or if you want to say hi and introduce yourself, please use the chat functionality to that. If you're not familiar with Zoom, in the chat functionality, you can set it so that it's seen by hosts and panelists only, or everyone. So if you are wanting to say hi to everyone, just make sure you set it to everyone. But as I say, if you could use the Q&A functionality for questions, that would be super helpful. So what we're going to try and cover today is on screen. There is quite a bit to get through. I have a video that I'm playing to you around anchor strategy as well, which is one of the big policy changes that we are seeing in public sector at the minute. But we're going to run through some basic policies, the role that the policy plays in an organisation. There are some live links around how to write a policy. So I'm not going to go through in detail today about how to write a policy. But I have got some links to some support that was put together specifically for this session for you to use afterwards. We'll chat a little bit about policy templates. And then, as I said, we'll talk about policy changes, so anchor strategy and what that means to how you might approach your clients going forward and changes to the marketplace as a result. We'll finish up with just a little bit about the support that's on offer from Go for Growth and how we might be able to support you as a small business going forward. And then, as I said, some time for Q&A. There's always a lot to cover on these webinars. We usually are quite strict to time in terms of 45 minutes, so we'll be working at quite high level. If you do want any further information outside of this session, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Our contact details are in the slide pack as well, and we'll always do our best to help you. So if we start by thinking about those basic policies, and it can feel, and I've run this webinar 6 or 7 times now, it can feel like it's almost too basic to cover these things, especially things like health and safety, general data protection regulations, environmental, etc. But these things are often included in the selection processes for public procurements, both in lower levels of value and higher levels of complexity, both under threshold and over threshold. And I think there are some things on there that I want to just pull out. So equality, diversity and inclusivity, inclusion, ED&I policies it's a really important one. And we're seeing a lot of focus on diversity, both in organisations, but also in supply chain. If you don't have a policy outlining your approach to equality, diversity and inclusion, it would be a good time to think about what you do, the policy decisions that you make, what you want your organisation to do, to act like, to think about the decisions that you make on ED&I. You might hear it, the American term is DE&I, depending on who you're dealing with, but equality, diversity and inclusion would be a good one to think about if you haven't already. And if you're not familiar with modern slavery, for example, in legislative terms, in public procurements, you won't be expected to have a modern slavery policy or a statement on your website unless you're turning over more than 36 million. However, modern slavery is a universal issue for all of us, actually, regardless of the size and scale of our businesses. And so there is a real encouragement, I think, certainly from us, to think about how you can be active in preventing modern slavery from happening in your supply chains, in your business, in those dealings that you have as an organisation on a day-to-day basis. So regardless of your turnover, my view is we should all be thinking about how we can prevent modern slavery regardless. What it means in a public sector tender capacity is you probably won't be tested on it if you're not turning over 36 million, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about it anyway. On there, we've got risk management on there, business continuity and disaster recovery. You can often get asked for those. What will you do in the event of a catastrophic digital failure, technology outage, a fire, etc., etc. Depending on what your business does and how you do it, that can take lots of different guises. I'm a volunteer for a multi-academy trust in South Yorkshire. I sit on the board of trustees. And of course, it's really important we have learners on site to have business continuity and disaster recovery in place. What will we do as an organisation if the worst case happens? Those things can be asked for in public procurement. So if you don't already have them, again, it's a good time to think about it. And also in terms of social value and sustainability, I'm going to focus on carbon reduction. So you might not be asked for a carbon reduction policy or a carbon reduction plan unless the value of the contract is above 5 million. That's where the legislation, the regulation sits at the minute. So if you are bidding for a total contract value of greater than 5 million, you will have to have a carbon reduction plan. However, what we are seeing is on lots of lower value opportunities, contracting authorities are saying if, and especially public sector buying organisations, if you are asked for, or if our client, a contracting authority, asks for a carbon reduction plan, you must have one available at point of request. Which really means that regardless of the level of opportunity that you're going for, it can be really helpful to have a carbon reduction plan. If you are a small business and you don't currently have one, Go for Growth does have a free at point of use carbon reduction planning platform that you can use. If you want more details on that, I'm not covering it in today's webinar, but if you would like more details on it, please do drop me an email. My email is at the in one of the last slides, so do let me know and we can send out some information for you. But what you see on screen is some headlines around the policies that you will be asked for. Things like general data protection regulations, we've seen cybersecurity really increase in terms of importance. You might be asked for GDPR policy, cyber policy, but you might also be asked for accreditation around it. And we've run a separate webinar on accreditations in the public sector, but Cyber Essentials Plus, information assurance. There's something called information assurance for small to medium enterprises, IASME, ISO 27001, etc. You might see that you're starting to be asked for some of those things around general data protection regulations and cyber privacy, information assurance, etc. I will just make a note, actually, although it is about accreditations, you might be asked to upload copies of policies, for example, as part of your tender submission. Or you might be asked on a self-cleaning basis to confirm that you have those policies available. And in terms of accreditations, you might be asked to, again, confirm that you will have an accreditation by contract start date if you are successful, or at a point in the future thereafter. And it's worth remembering that whatever you write down in your tender submission, if you're successful, that will be contractualized. And that means if you say you have something, you should have it at least by contract start date or whatever the date is that you're required to have it in place from. So what's the role of the policy? It's easy, I think, to fall into the trap of thinking that policies, or some of them at least, are a bit of a tick box exercise, and that if you don't have one, you can just get one for the purposes of the bid. That's really not how policies work. Actually, it's not how they should work. And it is true that you can and should use templates where that's helpful, but it is worth remembering that policies should be a reflection of how you work, of what's important to you, and it might be tested. So policies, like everything that you include in your bid submission, as I've said, they will become contractual. So you will be held to the policy that you include in your bid. And you might be asked for a particular policy, such as safeguarding, if the work that you will go on to do might involve you working on the same site as vulnerable people or children. So you might be in construction, for example, but you might be doing first fix, second fix, construction work, maintenance, etc., in a school setting or a health setting. And in those cases, you might be asked to have safeguarding policies in addition to the usual policies in construction that you would be asked for. It's also worth considering how you will manage compliance to a policy and what you'll do if someone, whether that's an internal stakeholder or an external stakeholder, breaches your policy. What's the consequence of non-compliance? How will you measure it? How often will you review it? So if you think about your team, policy has to be lived. And so there's a balance between having enough policies to help your business run the way that you want it to, and not having so many that no one can remember what they're doing. Policies also need to be accessible. For example, a social media use policy, staff might not remember what's in it all of the time, but they should know where to find it so they can easily check what the policy requirements are and be compliant with them. There is a point on the screen that you can see around policies that you are asked for in a bid. Should really only be policies that the contracting authority also adopt themselves. Now, sometimes that's not true. However, I always reflect on an experience, and it wasn't mine personally, but a colleague of mine was bidding, and as part of that bid submission, he was asked for a water usage policy. Now, my colleague at the time didn't have a water usage policy, wasn't actually that sure where to start with one. And because it's a non-standard policy, it was really difficult actually for him to find a template. What he did in that situation was go back to the contracting authority, and he said, through the clarification question process, I really want to be able to develop this policy and understand it and implement it in a way that makes sense. I don't have one, happy to develop one. Would you share yours with me so that I can see what it is that you're trying to achieve, and I can reflect those things in my own policies and practices in my organisation? So if you're being asked for a policy and it might feel a little bit different, or you don't have it, or you can't find a template, if you're in a bid situation, you can use the clarification question process to go and ask the contracting authority for them to share a policy that they're asking for. If they don't have it, it's not a policy that they adopt, but they're asking for it in the bid, I think it's really fine to ask the question about what's the requirement to have the policy as a supplier if it's not a policy that they are adopting and adhering to themselves. Obviously, you would do that really politely and respectfully, but you can do that. That's a fair question to ask. And when I've talked about making sure that our teams can find policies, there are lots of mechanisms that you can use to communicate them. They could be on your SharePoint site, your intranet site. They can be publicly available via your website. Internally, if you work on site together, or even virtually, you can use a toolbox talk, which is a verbal mechanism of communicating policy changes, but backed up by a written process that captures those signatures to show and demonstrate that people have been briefed and they've had an opportunity to ask any questions. So you can use a plethora actually of mechanisms to communicate your policies and communicate changes and reviews to your policies. So I said that we would cover how to write a policy today. So our thanks go out to a colleague of ours called Andrew Chamberlain, who kindly put together for us two things for the purposes of this. We're not going to go through them today, but these links will be live when you get them. He's put together a step-by-step guide. So the guide, that first link that you can see is a documented guide on the things to consider when you're writing a policy from scratch if you're not using a template. And he's also done a video version of that as well. So depending on what your preference is to read and to get the information on how to write a policy, those two things will be there for you. So have a look at those, feel free to use them. And Andrew's contact details are on the slide as well. So if you have any questions on the guide or the video tutorial, please direct them to me in the first instance and I will send them out to Andrew. However, writing from scratch might not always be needed, and it might not always be the best answer. Sometimes, especially with standard policies, you can get them from elsewhere, and then just make sure that they are appropriate and relevant to your organisation. So we've embedded some templates in the Go for Growth Public Sector Supplier Ready accreditation. So the Public Sector Supplier Ready accreditation is all about understanding what you need to have in your toolkit in order to be ready to take part in public sector opportunities. I've got a little bit more information on the PSSR, that's the abbreviation of it, the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation, when we get to the support on offer from Go for Growth. So I'll cover it there for us. If you are a member of the Federation for Small Businesses or local chambers of commerce, for example, we are members of both in Go for Growth. There are lots of useful and helpful templates as part of your membership that you can utilise to help you build your policies. And if you need HR templates, if you're not using a retainer organisation, I'll come to them in a second. If you're not using an HR support organisation or a health and safety retainer organisation, from an HR perspective, ACAS are great for all sorts of templates, including policies. If you want to know something for a specific tender opportunity, such as safeguarding that we've talked through before, contracting authority themselves that you're bidding with will be a good place to start. But usually lots of contracting authorities will have most of their policies in the public domain. So you might not want to use a specific contracting authority safeguarding policy. You can have a look around and see what people have put into different policies and what is best for your organisation, and effectively use what's in the public domain to build a template that's right for yours. If you have accreditations such as CHAS in construction, so the Contractors Health and Safety, the process itself of that annual certification through CHAS shows customers that your policies are part of what has been independently assessed and verified. So if you've already got accreditations in your organisation, it might be that your policy environment has already been assessed and verified, and it might be that that's very specific to construction, for example, but it will at least give you a sense check on some, if not all, of your policies. And retainer organisations can be very useful, actually. So even as a small business, if you're employing even one person, you are required by law to make sure that you have certain things in place from a human resources perspective, certain policies in place, and they need to be up to date. And the law isn't static, so things are changing. Retainer organisations don't have to be super expensive for an organisation. I've used them in most small businesses that I have run, micro businesses, including social enterprises where I'm employing people, because it's so important that we look after those people in our organisations. And it's not about ticking the box in terms of policy, but you do need to make sure that you have maternity, paternity, the absence related type policies, how you'll deal with things like disciplinary, how you'll deal with social media use, IT use, etc., etc. It all matters in pulling together how you work as an organisation. And from an HR perspective, retainer organisations can be a really useful tool on doing that. And they're often small businesses themselves, based locally, so they understand the local landscape, and so can be really useful for you. I definitely would recommend having a look at them. So we're going to move on to the next big policy move, anchor strategy. So what is anchor strategy? I've got a short video. It's a couple of minutes long to play. So it does talk about the North American context in the video, but it really flows through into the UK context. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide that this is around health in terms of what makes the NHS an anchor institution. Anchor institutions are broader than just health, obviously. It thinks about schools, universities, multi-academy trusts, local government, for example. And you'll see from the video that it's all about being rooted in place, rooted in their communities through the size and scale, thinking about how they can make a difference to their local economy. So let me see if I can get the tech to work and I'll play this video for us. If you can't hear it for any reason, please do pop something in the chat for me. Again, this video will be embedded when it comes out to you. Let's see if we can play it.
Anchor institutions. In the United States context, they're overwhelmingly nonprofit or public institutions. What defines an anchor institution is they're the kinds of organizations that are rooted in place. Unlike for-profit corporations, which move all over the world and change their locations, universities and hospitals, at least in the North American context, tend to stay where they're founded. And that's why they're called anchors. So we created this idea that we've been promoting in the States called the anchor mission. How do we become ever more connected to the community that we're rooted in, and as an institution, we're never going to leave? Hospitals represent over $1 trillion of economic activity every year. And we think that if that activity is focused to benefit the local community through localized purchasing, hiring, investment, that hospitals as anchor institutions can really have a transformative effect on the lives of people and the health of the community, and in particular, those who are in a more low income or poverty situation. So at Johns Hopkins, which is a very big health system in Baltimore, they created something called Hopkins Local, build, hire, buy locally. They've made a commitment to increase the number of city residents employed at Johns Hopkins. So far, they've hired 304 new people from specific zip codes. You need to say these are the neighborhoods we're going to hire from. They use search strategies. They identified physicians in their workforce that were particularly available to people who may not have graduated from high school. So my question back to you would be, what is going on in the UK that might provide the kind of incentive for directors of hospitals to start to move in a more demonstrably community benefiting direction?
So what does anchor strategy actually mean? I mean, of course, the slide was talking about NHS as an anchor, but most public sector organisations that I described that are rooted in place would be classed as an anchor. And why is it important to us as micro, small businesses, voluntary sector organisations? Well, that community benefiting direction is really important. And whilst the video poses the question to directors of hospitals, anchor strategy and anchor policy related to being an anchor institution is being discussed up and down the public sector. And in practical terms, it should, over time, improve how the public sector buys. What does that mean? It means that as local areas come together to agree what being an anchor institution means, we could hopefully start to see more consistency across requirements within those procurement opportunities. So we did some work recently for the London Anchor Institution Network, centred around removing barriers to small and diverse organisations. And a number of those recommendations are being taken forward. And it was actually, some of that recommendation was around creating consistency for providers. And that means that hopefully London anchors will become more accessible as customers. And I hear that being echoed all over our customer groups. And so it's a real positive policy shift to keep an eye on. if you want to have a look at what London Anchor Institution Network is doing, just to get some ideas of what anchor strategy could look like and is looking like, and certainly how it's developing in London, there is a live link that we'll send out with a copy of the slide disc, which is around how they're hiring local skills in London. And by focusing, I think, on being rooted in a place, there's more opportunity for us, a smaller organisation, to stand out for things like the sustainability of growth locally, that local economic regeneration piece, which is so important, not just to local government, but to all anchor institutions. And also it's a real opportunity for us to show the social and environmental impact that we are already making as local providers. And effectively what it means is that our size, our location and our capability is actually our strength. It's not the thing that is a barrier to us, it's a thing that actually becomes a strength going forward. And so it's a real policy movement that could really transform how we do business as smaller organisations with the public sector. And so if I think about just finishing up the session before we go for questions, just to give a really quick overview of Go for Growth. We know that the public procurement space can be tricky. I literally had a call this morning with a business where we were describing procurement as a skill, an art form, a black art actually, I think was mentioned, when we as smaller organisations are trying to respond to those tender requirements. I've been in procurement for 30 years. I've sat both sides of the table. I've let procurements into the marketplace and I've responded to procurements as a marketplace provider. We know that this is tough. Things like social value, as well as the sheer volume and complexity of questions in bid processes, just make the process in and of itself really challenging. And that's the mechanism for joining the public sector. So we're seeing lots of organisations choosing not to take part and are not seeing the success that they deserve. So our expertise in procurement spans both public and private sector. We are experts in sustainability and social value, as well as we have got long-standing experience of running micro, small and social enterprises. So we're designed to try and connect the marketplace community and the public sector community to bring us all together so that there is more connectivity and more accessibility. So what do we do as Go for Growth? How do we help? What's the what of that? So we work with organisations through webinars like this, where we've picked a topic, policies today, as you know, but trying to break down and understand what the public sector process is and how you can take part in those opportunities. And actually part of that is finding the relevant opportunity in the first place. That in and of itself can feel difficult. However, under the new regulations that are due to go live on October the 28th this year, 2024, there is something called the Central Digital Platform, which should put a lot of that data and all of the opportunities in one place. And so hopefully that will become a little easier. But at the minute, there are lots and lots of different portals. There'll stay lots of different portals. So we can support you through navigating those portals, finding those opportunities, qualifying them and submitting your tender opportunity. We don't write tenders, but we will help you to write it. And of course, policy guidance today was all about having a really high level look at policy, but we do that on our one-to-one coaching sessions, etc., all the way through. So we'll help you think about your social value narrative, how you can reduce carbon, protect the environment, what you're already doing and how to write that down, and how you can potentially expand on those things as well. And the big thing is around understanding those basic needs for any funding application. And we support on grant funding applications, commission services, tenders, contracts, but also we've done lots of support for National Lottery funding applications, other foundational types. So the Costa Foundation, for example, Tesco have got a foundation. Many of the big corporates have got local foundations with grant opportunities there. So any sort of funding application we can try and support you with. Now, how do we do that? What we want is for you to have as personalised support as is possible. So you can come to us for one-to-one coaching. You can come to skills-based events like this one. We've got online training courses that are available locally, lots and lots of guidance. But the big thing is the public sector supply ready accreditation. If you don't know what you don't know, so lots of businesses, probably 50% of all of the businesses that we support, and we're supporting around 11,000 businesses at any given time. Over half, just under actually half of them, 47% will tell us, I actually don't know if I have got everything in my toolkit because I don't know what needs to be in it. The public sector supplier ready accreditation gives you that view. It allows you to have a look at what you're likely to be asked for and therefore need to have in your toolkit for almost any public sector opportunity, the generic parts of it. So it won't look at your insurances, for example, and it won't go into specific policies because they or your subcontractor usage, because they will be different from opportunity to opportunity, but it will look at those generic elements, and it will allow you to work through whether you have got your ducks in a row, and if you haven't, how to build the evidence of that. Lots of embedded support wrapped around by Go for Growth. And the public sector supply ready accreditation, as is everything in Go for Growth, it's offered free of charge to providers. So we are always free at point of use, and we will be free at point of use forever. So we're funded by the public sector. So those public sector contracting authorities that work with us, they invest in Go for Growth so that all of the support, and that's upwards of 36,000 individual engagements at the minute, all of those things are offered free of charge to you. So please do feel free to utilise that support should you want to. And the only other thing to say before we open up for questions is here are our contact details. You can book a one-to-one if you want using that bookable calendar link, or you can email myself or my colleague Lauren, or you can use those mobile numbers on there. Give us a shout. You can WhatsApp, you can text, you can call. And then we have our social media pages also, and a link to our events page is on there. And if you do think you might want to have a look at that public sector supply accreditation, then the PSSR link is there also. So please feel free to have a trawl through. And if you want to stay in touch with us, you can scan that QR code, you can click on the link. We do send out a newsletter, but we don't spam. We try to only talk to you about things that are really important. So things that you tell us are important, we try to answer and inform and be a helpful tool at any point. But of course, you can opt out at any time if you find that we're not telling you the things that you would like to know. And you can always feed back to Go for Growth. We are always really keen to know what's needed and develop useful support based on the need. And so that's been a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through policy and through some support for Go for Growth. I will just open up for questions and I'll stop sharing. I'll have a quick look in the Q&A and see if there is anything there. I will just see. There is nothing in the Q&A at the moment. Sometimes it's the case that you think of that question as soon as you leave. If you do, please feel free to use those contact details to send me an email asking any questions, or book a one-to-one if you just want to have a coffee and a chat. I can't supply the cake virtually, but I certainly can supply the chat. So please do feel free to get in touch with either myself or my colleague Lauren. We'll do as much as we can to support. Thank you. We've just had a post on the chat just saying thank you. Lots of food for thought. There is, and this stuff changes and moves all the time. So it is a bit of a moving target. But Go for Growth, we like to present ourselves as an extension to your workforce. So if you need us, you know where we are. Please do not hesitate to get in touch, and we will always do everything that we can to help. If we finish early in a webinar, we never keep everyone here. We know that we are all super busy. So the last thing I will say before heading off is just say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy calendar to join us today. I hope that was useful. If we can be of any further help, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you and have a good rest of your Tuesday.